Good evening. I'm Susan Bailey, Executive Director of 108 Contemporary, and thank you for tuning in tonight for a virtual artist talk with Molly Murphy Adams. Since 2013, 108 Contemporary has provided exhibition space in the Tulsa Arts District for the most innovative contemporary craft from Oklahoma and around the world. We're proud to continue on this path by presenting the exhibition, The Space Between Anita Fields and Molly Murphy Adams through November 21st. So many organizations and individuals have believed in this project and patiently waited for it to be realized. We appreciate the Osage Nation Foundation for making a catalog publication possible through their generous financial support. And the catalog is now available in the gallery, so I encourage you to come by before the exhibition closes on November 21st and pick up your complimentary copy of the catalog. It's beautiful. Our sincere gratitude also goes to the exhibition's presenting sponsor, the Mid-America Arts Alliance, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the state arts agencies of Arkansas, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Texas. In addition, we appreciate the generosity of the Flint Family Foundation and the Tulsa Artist Fellowship. The 108 Contemporary Board of Directors must also be recognized for their unwavering support of Oklahoma artists and contemporary fine craft. And as always, the 108 Contemporary team has been invaluable in bringing this exhibition to life. It's an honor to work with people who are so dedicated to the mission of 108. Of course, it's also been an honor to work with Molly and Anita, and I've really appreciated their patience in making this exhibition a reality. Born in Montana, Molly Murphy Adams earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Montana in 2004. She's made Tulsa, Oklahoma her home for over a decade. Molly bases her work on concepts of hybridization, pairing the needlework techniques of beadwork and embroidery with printmaking and paper media. Her works illustrate the blending of cultures, identities, and histories by juxtaposing dissimilar methods, media, and narratives. Her work has been exhibited at museums and galleries across the nation and can be found in the permanent collections of the Virginia Museum of Fine Art in Richmond, Virginia, the Sam Noble Museum of Natural History at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, the Gilcrease Museum right here in Tulsa, the Museum of Great Plains in Lincoln, Nebraska, and Missoula Art Museum in Missoula, Montana, and the Nerman Museum of Contemporary Art in Kansas City, Kansas. Molly was a Tulsa Artist Fellow from 2019 to 2020 and is currently a graduate student in art history at Oklahoma State University. I'd like to now turn over the screen to Molly Murphy Adams.
Hello. I wish I could see everybody's smiling faces, but we're going to have to do with just my smiling face, I guess. Normally, I make do with humor to cover up the introductions, but I can't really tell if everyone's laughing, so I'm just going to assume on the feedback there. It is such an honor and a culmination of a lot of planning to get to see this work by Anita and I up in the gallery. And it was really wonderful to see Susan's introduction in front of the installation piece, Grid in Gold there, that has been a pet project of mine for a couple of years to realize. And so to get to see it there and is really a wonderful, wonderful culmination for me. So I was mulling over some of the approaches tonight that I could take. And it's obviously a little difficult when I'm not in the gallery sharing that space with you. So you guys tonight get to have a window into the imminently messy and chaotic studio of an artist who works in fiber and beads. And so that's just the reality. I consider trying to make it look like something it's not, but this is it. There's components. So that will be our theme for tonight, is components, lots of pieces that come together in cumulative projects. So I have a PowerPoint with some images I want to share tonight, because if we were in that space together, we would walk around the space, we would look at the pieces, and we would talk about them in groups and individual pieces. But we can't, so we're going to do our best to share those images with you guys here tonight. And so I did want to start with that. Let me shift to sharing screen. One moment. There we go. Okay, thank you guys for bearing with me. So this, we are going to, since you guys all got to see my face for the intro, we can skip to this now. So that first piece that I wanted to talk about, and nursing along and trying to find a space and a venue, because I really, I had such strong feelings about this piece, and I felt that this piece was going to be a piece that really spoke to why I was doing this work, why I was excited about this work, and to talk about both my beginnings in this work and where I hope to be when I feel like I've maybe solved some problems or presented some answers. The title of this piece is Grid in Gold, and it is comprised of individual panels on paper, 6 inches, 8 inches high by 6 inches wide, Bristol board, and each different panel is painted with gold gouache, and then beadwork is added, and then embroidery is added if I felt the embroidery was an asset to the design. And my excitement over these pieces was really about my excitement about plains beadwork specifically. And so that is kind of a really good way to open up and to say what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. I am a descendant of the Oglala Lakota tribe from South Dakota, and I've been doing beadwork for since I was in single-digit years. My mother was given up for adoption, and in the process of her finding her birth family and finding her way back to her cultural origin and her roots, beadwork was something that she learned from some really generous women in the Indigenous and Native community in Great Falls, Montana, where we lived. And so beadwork for her became a way, an entry point back into Native communities, into participating. And that rang true for me as well. Some of us have heard a lot in the news. If you're not in the Native community, you might be new to the concepts of things like the residential schools and the 60s scoop, and those might be subjects that you're not familiar with, but you know, those are subjects for those of us in the Indigenous community, whether we've been raised in that community with continuity, or like myself, if we've experienced those disruptions, you know, we understand that firsthand in our community. So that disruption of continuity culturally was a big factor in our lives. My mother worked hard to help us regain a foothold in that culture, and beadwork was the way for her that she did that, and it remained true for me as well. So beadwork, learning the techniques and the process and understanding the designs was also a good entryway into understanding my own family history when I could not access it directly. And so by understanding these designs, I felt like I could sort of bridge that gap of knowledge and have an understanding of who these women were that created these designs, and who took the extraordinary loving care of decorating their world with these really beautiful patterns. So when I try to share that with people, one of the pieces I come up against is that a lot of people who are unfamiliar with beadwork and with Native art and in general often can't see the design past the object. They see the object, the moccasins or the decorated clothing, and they see the whole object, but they already know what it means or where it comes from. And so I have a hard time getting to a point where I can converse about design, and I'm really fascinated by formal design. And so for me, this project came out of a desire to not only formally explore all of those things that I'm fascinated with about beadwork and design, but to hopefully be able to take those elements of design and to share them in a way that would shine a light onto what I think is the real graphic genius that's happening in these patterns. And so for me, it's an opportunity to be playful and to be really revenant with these designs, and to really try to show and share with other people how versatile and beautiful these patterns are. So for me, this process of these is that I originally started off with 16, and then because I can't stop and won't stop, I just kept adding 4, 8, 10 at a time, and I now am about 100 of them. And so for each of them, what I do is I begin in a batch, and I just cut the paper, and I just start drawing in pencil different fragments of designs. So really simple shapes: triangles, compounded triangles, half triangles, rectangles, stacks, and then I paint them in gold. And then I wait, and then I get out my beads one day, and I just start playing with color and shape, and I start beading. And there's no preordained plan, there's no sketch. And so I start applying the beadwork, and then after I've done that, I go back and I think, is there any part of this that could be made better with embroidery? And if it works, then I add a little bit of embroidery. And if not, if I think, no, this is complete, then I stop. One of the difficulties with this as an installation set is that there is no framing, there is no security, there is no hardware, there is no glass. So I really intentionally wanted these to be pretty raw and unprotected and on the wall, and installed with just a single gold bulldog clip. Part of it is that beadwork, when it's behind glass, completely flattens. You can't see it, you can't appreciate it. And so framed work is difficult for me. But for galleries and exhibition spaces, exposed paper is nerve-wracking, to say the least. It makes them very nervous. So I appreciate 108's bravery and trust in me when I said that it will be okay, it will be secure, and that I'm really installing this with the kind of spirit that beadwork comes from, that you make it, that it's beautiful, but that it may have a lifespan, and it may be damaged, and that's okay, that it may have a complete lifespan. So that is somewhat of a 180 turn from the preciousness that galleries and museums have been trained, and the burden of care that they have for artwork when it's in. It's very hard to tell them it's okay if it gets damaged. That's a bit of a leap. So in this image that you guys have been able to look at while I've been jabbering away, there is the installation view as it is at 108 right now. And one of the things I love about it is that they let me go full height and paint the wall behind it so that the white would really pop. And the gold gouache paint, as you walk past, changes from sort of a darker, duller, or matte finish, and then to a shiny finish. So it changes according to your physicality and your viewpoint of it. And so it's something that for me is really enhanced by being present, by being bodily present, and by experiencing it. And also is very reminiscent for me what it's like to be in spaces where Native people, where we're wearing our beadwork, where we're dancing, we're walking, we're moving, and not being still in a static manner, but moving. So movement is a part of this. And then on the right, we have a close-up of this big pile of the pieces as we were looking through them one day. And is an alternate view of a test installation I did on gray paper when I was testing different background colors, configurations, and just overall checking to make sure. And so this is a good view of that deep, the vibrancy of the gold when you're at a sharp angle. Most art pieces aren't designed to be seen at a 30-degree angle, so I really love the little nuance of this when you're there and you get to experience it in person. So some of you might have been thinking, what is she talking about with components of beadwork and Northern Plains beadwork. And I know I'm jumping order, but you'll bear with me. So this is a pair of really fabulous late 19th century, early 20th century Lakota women's leggings. So these would be worn on the lower part of the legs above the moccasins and be highly visible when you're dancing or at ceremonies. And so this to me is a really classic example of beadwork. And if we were to go back, we could probably see some of those shapes repeating and showing up in part, not in whole, but in part. And so I really love these designs. And I think these designs have just a lot of a beautiful shape and flow. And so I love taking them apart and using those parts, not to deconstruct the whole that it's in this piece that we're looking at, but to try to break it down to its smallest components, to appreciate and explore those components, and to have a better understanding of those components, that then when we can go back and look at the whole, we can have a greater appreciation of these older historic pieces and understand the real depth of the women and their design and their artistry and their intent when they were making these pieces. One of the ways that I reflect on this is I think about my own challenges of working, with the exception of my fellowship. I've had a home-based studio for most of the time. And so I think about my own difficulties of making work with responsibilities and pressure and employment and all the things that go with that. And then I remember I have all this wonderful specialty equipment and full spectrum lighting and storage containers and ergonomic chairs and tables and the works. And I think, so if this is what I'm able to do with all of my advantages, I can further appreciate that this was done in 1890 before electric lighting, and what that would mean to, have to carve out that time of day in natural light. So those are some of my thought processes, and part of why I appreciate these historic works so much. So that piece, Grid and Gold, is an installation piece. So the entire collection fits into one shoebox size box. So another component of all my works in this show was that they are all components. They're all collections of works, and so they can be, most of them can be, some of these can be expanded or contracted in groups, but I'd like to think that there's a small shred of the nomad still that I can pack up an entire exhibit of work and still put it into my car. So we're still being semi-nomadic on that end. So the second body of work that's in the show that is installed as a group collection started off when I was teaching a Design 1 course at University of Tulsa, and working with some of the color theory of Joseph Albers, and teaching that. And teaching is a great way to re-explore some concepts that you knew once but haven't applied recently. And so working with students and explaining the process and helping them understand it, I started to want to play with color as well. And so I did what I was calling sort of a non-pattern color version of the process I did with Grid and Gold. So this one is Grid and Color, or Color Grid. And so each of these panels on Bristol board, again, started off with a circle shape drawn in pencil, and then I would bead those long stitches in a color, and then I would punch the holes, and then I would do the embroidery at an opposing texture diagonal, or just from the beadwork, and I would pick the thread fairly randomly and pick the bead colors fairly randomly. And then once I had all of them, all of the paper components done, I just, as a group, started just painting canvases in colors I enjoyed. So none of this was pre-planned. So it was just about being playful with colors at the time. And at first I made 6, and then I made 10, and then it, kept going. And so I believe in this installation we have 18 on display. and it just fit the wall perfectly to install them in these 2 long wide rows. And here is an alternate installation that was considered as a grid. We'll come back to that. So this is the interaction of color, Joseph Albers, some of the examples that I was working with students. And on the right, 2 of his color experiments are exploring what happens with colors and how they interact with each other and how that changes our vision of him. In the pink and green example, the color that is in the center of the green here, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, is the color that is in the upper bank here for comparison, and vice versa. And then the same is done on a larger scale in the orange and the blue, showing how these colors really dynamically change when they interact with each other. And so it was my hope that in playing with these colors in the exhibit, that I could have some of that same experimentation. It might be not very surprising to say that beadwork is not the most spontaneous art form. It's usually something that is very planned, very measured, very constrained. There's not a lot of physicality to it in terms of big motion or movement or speed. It's not gestural like painting or drawing. And if there's any component of that, it's very narrow in the very beginning. And then there's just a lot of very, very tight, focused execution. And so for me, it was really playful to get to not necessarily have a goal or to be as focused on pattern, but to be playful with just pure color. And that's a little bit brighter version from a different perspective when we were testing some installation options. And Joseph Albers' interaction of color might break your brain if you have the opportunity to explore it. There's a wonderful app that's only available at, I believe, and that is super, super fun. So these are close-ups of the technique where you can see the vertical rows of beadwork, the horizontal lines of embroidery, and the different color canvases. Okay, and then to move on to the bodies of work in the show that are about photography and landscape. And I need to give a big thank you to my friend Leroy Graff, who graciously gave me the use of these photos, wonderful photographer, filmmaker. And we had been talking about trying to collaborate, but years and time and distance in school made that tough to do. So he gave me a selection of photos and told me I could use them. And I worked with some great studio assistants here for a while to help me make some design choices about cropping and printing these on archival photos. My purpose for this was that, as I said earlier, I'm so excited about beadwork designs and I'm so excited about these works. But sometimes I have a hard time, I feel like, communicating the designs past the object. And so I thought, what if I take, and I'm also very committed to the idea that Indigenous art and design is incredibly connected to landscape and incredibly connected to place. And so I wanted to try to reflect that in a really, what seemed to me hitting you over the head with it, but maybe it seems subtle, but if I could literally place the beadwork over the landscape, these designs over the landscape, maybe I could communicate for me what it means like to look in that landscape and to see those designs and patterns there. So this is a series of drone shot landscapes, which I thought was a really great way of removing the human physical gaze. So we're not looking out at the landscape as a person standing on it, but we're looking above the landscape where our anthropomorphic view is minimized. And so we're seeing it in a more holistic way. And so I wanted to impose that beadwork as a veil over it, as a way of saying literally that these patterns are here, that they come from here, that they are here, and that they are about here. And this piece is a winter view of a desert scene, I believe in New Mexico. And the designs that come off of it are from both basket and beadwork designs. And it has a corresponding and complementary piece of another desert view in the summertime with a similar but not exact pattern. And in the two of them, I was drawn to pair these together as a set of triptychs, because in this one, we have the landscape being cross-sected, divided by a man-made shape that is going in this upward angle. And when I saw these two images, I was thinking about how there was this really wonderful complement of, here we have this natural cross-section of the landscape through the erosion in the arroyo that in the spring and summer would have flowing water in it. And we can show how that's meandering through the landscape in a way that might be at times rather violent or sudden, or but is not a man-made or interfered with. And then here we have the opposite, where we have those erosions going through the landscape in one direction, and then the imposement of this road cross-cutting those natural shapes. So in the two of them, I'm using a combination of basket and beadwork designs to emphasize those sorts of patterns coming from that place. And here's a close-up. So when I'm talking about beading on paper, I imagine some of you are going, what the hell? But yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. So these are large scale pieces. I believe these as sets are 50 by 24 installed on panels. And so that each of these three portions of the photos are archivally printed ink on a wonderful soft 100% cotton paper, not soft, but soft in comparison to writing paper or normal printer paper. And I do use a Pellon reinforcement in the back, and then I'm sewing on this paper exactly like you would sew on fabric, except for that it chews my hands up and I have to make sure I don't bleed on the paper. But so it is difficult work and it's precise work, and I can't draw on the paper. So I have to make tiny pencil marks and to follow that and to try to create that symmetry that we can see here from panel to panel. So this work is not about filling in the background. It's not about impressing anyone with the volume of beads that's applied to the surface. It's about trying to create a really strong interplay between the negative space and the positive space, and to make every design element really count and have impact. So the number of beads is a lot more minimal than other works I've done, but it's an exercise in restraint, which nobody has claimed is my strong point. This is where you would all laugh. So there's that close-up again, and a close-up of the other one with the winter view. The second trip that's in the show is, it's hard to pick favorites. It's like picking a favorite kid, but I think this might actually be my favorite. This was another complementary landscape set of two different shorelines, one desert and one a really lush northwest coast. I believe Leroy took these in Oregon, and I was again struck with the contrast and similarity of these two types of landscapes. And so for these, I wanted to feature a vertical orientation. And so I did a beadwork taken from just border patterns on women's dress, Lakota women's dresses, and then repeating spine or lizard spine designs, something very simple to just indicate flow. And so for these, my idea was that we have these, on the coastline, you really get to have a deep understanding of your participation in water cycles, in that the water is literally in front of you. And in our landlocked state, sometimes that's not as obvious, but I love that, that vision here. So these are water cycle arid and water cycle lush. And they have the exact same beads, the same number of stitches, the same number of beads, the same location, everything is exactly the same. I just altered the color of the triangles. They have triangles on each one. And so this for me was also restraint in not doing different patterns, but in trying to create gestalt through repetition, and that the sum of the parts would be greater than the individual components. So there's a couple of detail shots of those individual stitches. So it might seem numbingly boring, but for those white stripes that you see here, those are just nothing more than single stitches of 6 white beads. So every time I scoop up and pick up 6 white beads, and then I stitch, and then I do 6 white beads, and do that for a couple days. And here is a studio view of how I actually work on these. What you can't see is that there's a small piece of cardboard with a little notch or hole cut out of it underneath the photo, so it supports it a little bit, but it comes out past the edge of my table. And then I use bead mat or pieces of wool fabric so that I can keep beads close, but also so that I can shield that delicate printed surface from my hands, my tools. I make sure I take off jewelry, watches, and so this, while again not being a lot of volume of beadwork, is more stressful and has to be more intentional and very, very purposeful. Another question I get all the time, and I'll just head this one off right now, is no, I do not pre-punch any holes. That might be possible with embroidery, but it's not possible with beadwork because of I think really just the volume that the beads have, the physical volume that they have. You just can't really anticipate exactly where the thread should come up or go down. Let me see if I can. This, no. We'll see if we can come back to this. This is supposed to be a time-lapse video, and everybody loves a time-lapse video. Oh, it's not going to do it. All right. My apologies that we can't watch me bead in super fast motion. We'll see if we can come back to that. So this piece that I was going to try to share the time lapse, but it doesn't seem to be functioning on the PowerPoint. Spoiler alert, it is just me stitching 10 white beads over and over and over, or 8 white beads. This piece that we're looking at here is an aerial view of a forest in winter. And I may have actually shot the moon on this one for subtlety. I wanted to do this one in parallel rows of beads that have a vertical similarity based off of wearing robes, crow style wearing robes. And in the detail shot that we can get on the right, we can see that the stripes that are vertical here, be able to barely just see, are alternating luster and matte finish of the exact same bead. And so those are alternating in blocks of, I can't remember if it's 10 or 12, and then alternating and then alternating. So it's something that is so subtle that you probably do have to be there in person to see it, but it's very rewarding if you get to see it in person. And I can honestly say this might be the toughest one to photograph, because white beads on pale blue paper is unforgiving, absolutely unforgiving to a camera. And when I said I had a favorite kit, I might have lied. This is maybe my second favorite. And this one is just a top view of a really lush cedar forest in the Pacific Northwest, and with the same pattern taken from it. But this one, instead of taking it from beadwork patterns, I really wanted to think about the place that this was from. And so this design comes from a Northwest Coast style imbricated woven basket made from cedar root bark. So the entire roots are dug out of the ground. That might be hard for us to understand here in this landscape, but in a Pacific Northwest landscape, the duff forest floor is incredibly thick and loose, and the cedar roots grow in very long direction towards water. And so you can do up these beautiful long stretches and use that bark and weave with it. It makes gorgeous, gorgeous vessels. So these nested tipped designs were so beautiful on these baskets. And so I wanted to take that pattern and overlay it over this this gorgeous view of this conifer forest. And here is a close-up of that beadwork. And again, this is nothing but 6 black beads over and over and over. And the difficulty with this one is to maintain orientation and to maintain that kind of parallel quality over and over, which I think is an appropriate way to honor homage to the original makers of these items who did this without, again, without my all my amenities. And so a little bit of history of the show and why I have many, many COVID rosettes all over the wall. I originally pitched this show to 108 in 2018. So it takes a long time, even in better times, to take a show from concept to application to approval and then to installation. So this exhibit was originally planned to open in October or November of 2020. And so obviously, you know, this was just one of the many casualties of that time period and the way that things got turned upside down. And in the uncertainty in the beginning of that, quarantining at home and staying at home. And I felt like I wanted to bead, but I also feel like I did not want to bead. I really did not feel creative or inspired. And I have a background in science and specifically in virology. That was my first major in college before I switched to art. So it also was very, very strange to be hearing about, you know, hearing everybody else suddenly talk about things that I knew about and that certainly nobody had wanted to hear me talk about before. And so I was thinking about all these new terms and visuals that I might have been familiar with, but we were all getting accustomed to collectively. And one of the visuals that I realized that I never thought I would ever talk to anybody about was a spiked, you know, a protein spike coronavirus. That was an image I might have been familiar with before, but now that's something that I share with people, that we all understand it and understand that graphic sensibility. And I was thinking about how close it came to resembling some of our traditional rosette patterns, and how just small design elements away from it in terms of that really simple and kind of universal radiating mandala. And so I started beading COVID coronavirus rosettes. And I again was saying, I have no plan. I just would pick a color and then pick a second color and do these concentric circles radiating out and out. And I wouldn't come up with a plan until I decided I'd gone far enough. And then I would do the membrane and the spikes on the outside. And that was the only rule I had, is that I would make spikes on the outside. And I would just make them until they were big enough or good enough. And I wasn't too worried about making them perfect, but I can't not either. So that's part of it. So I ended up wanting to install these in some way in the space, perhaps not as a work unto themselves, but kind of as a presence in the gallery that's both beautiful, but a little sinister and maybe a little fun, but also kind of weird. And so I finished these rosettes on some hand cut and shaped plaques and painted them gold in order to bring them in and blend them in with all the other work that Anita and I had in the show. One of the common factors is we're both pretty enamored with gold right now as a tone that we're putting in everything. And so there's these slightly menacing COVID rosettes hovering above the gallery. Beautiful, but also a little menacing. And I think we're pretty close to the question and answer. I'm just going to see if I could get my time lapse, because everybody likes to watch beadwork in fast motion. All right, I give up on the slow motion or the time lapse. Forgive me all. And now I know how, Susan, there you are. I was just about to call for you.
Hello. Well, I invite everyone to, if you have questions for Molly, to put them in the chat feature. But I'll just kind of start things off a little bit. You started talking about your background in science with the COVID clusters, which I find fascinating. And I wondered if you could just sort of expand on how, in general, you feel like your background in science has an impact on practice.
So I was really lucky to have an opportunity. My first job in high school was another wonderful Indigenous woman, Judy Gobert. If you're out there, thank you. Got me a job working as her lab assistant in a virology lab, and it was incredibly formative for me in ways that I didn't understand at the time about understanding precision and also understanding the process of experimentation and accepting results, and to really understand the scientific process as a process where you pose a question and you perform an experiment and then you accept the results without taking it personally. So the results are not a reflection on yourself. If at anything, if they're any personal reflection, that they're a reflection on your experiment. So the solution is always to go back into a different way. So it really helped me understand that methods and repetition and experiments can be tweaked and repeated, and that the problem is not necessarily you, but it's how you pose the question and how you did the experiment. So simply back up and try it a different way and try it again and try it again. But it also had a really big impact on me visually. I spent an enormous amount of time looking through microscopes, and it put a literal black ring around everything. I mean, I would have dreams about black rings and counting, and so it did affect me, in terms of how I saw things in patterns and looking through the microscopes. But also what I was looking at is I was looking at these really, beautiful but sinister organic shapes of cell formations adhered to the bottom of plates and petri dishes, and then stained and cured, and we were examining them and counting them, and so there was this visual repetition of strict geometric shapes, but also really organic and unpredictable shapes that were inside of there. So it was a marriage and a pairing of those two, sort of everything in grids, your pipettes and your cell plates and your gridded book that you keep all your notes in, and everything was very gridded and geometric. And then there would be these wonderful organic growths that you would look at, and that also happened in miniature. So that's not a surprise that appeals to me. Both the very small and the very large, and components and repetitions and grids. So maybe I'm never quite past it, but yeah. So I still think in scientific terms, and probably in doing many of them. Mm-hmm. And like in not considering one, but let's do it again, and let's change the variable, and let's tweak it a little bit and try it with this factor and this and this, and mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. I just find that fascinating, the connection between those two aspects of your background. We do have a question in the chat box. How did you begin manipulating photos with beadwork and embroidery?
Yeah, I started actually with printmaking. And so I started the hard way, which was by taking photos and making solar plates or photo plates, etchings, and then making etchings, and then taking the etchings and then doing beadwork on the etchings. So once I figured out that I could work with photographers and just use photos, that seemed like a really fun shortcut to take the printmaking part of it out. So I was working originally from a printmaking perspective of combining solar plates, actually using family photos and doing it that way, but also doing dry point etchings and actually just drawing myself into copper plates and printing those etchings, and leaving intentional space for beadwork. And so that was how I actually started, was the really hard way of doing it with printmaking and etchings. And then photos seemed like a logical, like, hey, you don't have to make it hard. You could just take the image and just print it. Also not do an entire edition, but just do, one. So that came out of wanting to play with landscape more. So the photos for me were not about maybe inserting people into those, but about inserting the beadwork into a landscape. And the photos were the shortcut to being able to take the viewer from looking at objects, beaded objects, and instead looking at the landscape through the lens of someone who understands beadwork. So now that,
I'm sorry.
What's that?
I loved your comment about, removing that human gaze through the drone. I hadn't the view, so that was really awesome.
I've done some earlier ones that are just more of a human viewpoint landscape that, Roy also let me use some other files, and we were working with more of his traditional landscape views. And I like those, but there's also the problem in there that design wise, I had to grapple with the horizon line. And so what is above that or below that? And I really didn't want to. And I was like, there's something really powerful about a horizon line that when I put this design over it, it's actually overpowering the design. So I either have to work with it, or I have to work around it, or I have to dull the image to the point where that horizon line becomes less powerful. And by the time I was doing that, it just wasn't as interesting. So I thought, if I don't want the horizon line in there, why don't we just, get above it and not include it? Because that's what I was really thinking of, as more cartography and map and more, but also wanting to truly de-emphasize the human, the anthropomorphic gaze. Because I think that is an unfortunate legacy of Western viewpoints, is to view everything through human consumption or experience. And I think it can be a really leveling experience to say, what are, if we're just a part of this scene, what does that look like with everything else in it, with plants and animals and weather, and make ourselves, insignificant in a good way.
Great, thank you. Okay, another question. Comes from someone saying, I really enjoy your color exploration in different ways in the installation. I'm interested in hearing you talk about traditional colorways of indigenous beadwork. Are there regional variations? What more do you want to explore?
There are regional variations. And so each tribe might have its own emphasis on different color schemes and what those meanings are. And so in Lakota, there's often an emphasis on either the red, black, yellow, and white, or a deep blue, red, green, and yellow. So there's these different color schemes that apply to different perspectives. And then there's also, beads are not paint. So I don't get to actually pick my colors. I don't get to mix my colors. I have the most incredible collection of beads. These containers behind me, have so many beads. It's ridiculous. I have them sorted by size, country of origin, and color. And I'm always running out of space. So I'm always having to take stuff out of there and find other storage for it. But I don't actually get to pick to make those colors myself. So I have to take what's available. And artists in the past had to do the same. So some of that limited color palette is because I recently was working on a project and I got out 20 shades of blue. And that's a wonderful opportunity. But I understand that in the past that some of their choices were limited by availability and marketplace. But and so my tribal background, Lakota, has a much more this geometric of the example I showed earlier. And the piece that's behind me and the piece that's behind Susan, those are much more geometric. Those are more Plains Lakota style inspired. But where I grew up in Western Montana was in the Salish community. And those were floral beadwork with wonderful soft blues and vibrant greens and pinks and a really beautiful floral botanical palette. And so I feel really free to pick and choose based on what I'm doing and what I like. And while I'm a student of all the work that's gone before me, I also feel very free to be a contemporary artist and to choose what materials work for me, and to really take delight in the bead colors that I have available to me, and to know that, if my ancestors 100 years ago had those bead colors, they would have been really excited about them too. So I appreciate all the colors that are available. I do tend to stick within certain color schemes that just work. And so I use a ridiculous amount of just black and white. Like on the piece that's behind me, that's black, white, and blue. And then I bring color in through some other means, through fabric and through paint and sometimes paper, photography. So for me, it's interesting to play with restrained color palettes sometimes. So with that color experiment that we looked at with the circles, the embroidery, and the canvas, I have limited number of bead colors, and I have a fairly limited number of embroidery colors. And so the playful part for me was to mix paint color. So I could mix a paint color that I don't have, or I could mix a paint color that might even be unattractive, but it could interact with the embroidery and the bead color in a way that was fun. And because I wasn't actually committed, I could paint more canvases than I needed, and then I could just not use some. Although that's not true. I just did more embroidery and beadwork. I can't just like not do it. But and as far as color schemes right now, what has been really fun is there's been some advances in bead technology, and we have a lot of metal beads, actually gold plated beads. So some of my beads that are in the exhibit, if they're gold plated. They're not painted or glazed or just glass. They can gold plate glass beads. So the shine on them is fantastic. And they don't tarnish and they don't wear, and they're just gorgeous. So I love that technology has brought in metallics into a game that it really wasn't before, or on older beadwork, the metal actually was steel and it rusted. So there's older pieces that are very damaged because those metal beads over time rusted and rotted thread. So I love it that metallics are in the game now. And now I've got gold spray paint and gold gouache and gold beads. So it's going to get very shiny. All right, so.
Wonderful. Okay, more questions. So how did you make the jump from virology to majoring in art?
So I was really young when I was in college for the first time. I turned 17 the week before my first week of college classes. So I was a baby. I was just a wee little baby, and I really had no business being there. So when I finished my freshman year of college, before I was 18, I actually dropped out of school. I was burned out, and I was like, I'm not ready to be here. I'm not actually ready to do this. So when I was preparing to go back to school, and I was thinking about science, and I'd had the bad fortune of working in that lab. And the bad part of it was that I learned about research funding at the laboratory level. And it would be like if you were interested in owning a restaurant and you had to go to the sausage making factory on your first day, and you had to learn how academic funding worked, and the publisher perished. So that was overwhelming to me at 17. I was like, is that the life I want, of writing for research grants and like doing this doctorate program and not even being able to start my own research until I'm in my mid-30s at best? So I just felt really disjointed, and I thought, I'm going to major in art, and then I'll figure it out. And I'll just go and I'll major in art, and I'll get started, and I'll figure out what I want to do. And I fell in love with the art program. And I decided when I was graduating, I followed it all the way through and did the BFA program, fell in love with it, did very well. And by the time I was graduating, I had my senior thesis exhibit was already booked to travel. And I decided I was going to just keep doing this until the wheels fell off, and they have not yet fallen off. So we're still here.
Great.
That is the long story of that.
That's a good story. Okay, let's see what else we have here. I heard a little echo of Wolf's A Room of One's Own when you talk about creating your art with all the pressures of everyday life and the effect on creativity. Do you think your experience is influenced by gender, and if so, how?
So much. I'm sitting here in my little room of one's own that's all cramped and full with all of my art and all of my stuff. Yeah, gender's a big, big part of it. While I always feel lucky to have an art career, I also know that that, you know, it's not a tough business. It's a tough way to make a living. It's a great business. It's just a hard way to make a living. And it's a hard way to make a living for moms and for parents. And so the one part about beadwork that was forgiving for me is that when I was a mom with a little one, my daughter was 2.5 when I graduated from college. So I was a parent along that path as well. Part of the reason I was a beadworker and not a painter was that I could set it down and nothing dried up and got ruined. I mean, there were some practical things like I can't paint. I love painting, but it's like I can't do that with a 3-year-old. My life doesn't accommodate that. So beadwork was really forgiving to me. I could set it down and nothing dried up and nothing went to waste. And I had a market for it. And so yeah, there's gender at play in all of it. And I also felt when I was first doing major exhibits, I felt that it was hard to be taken seriously in the art world under 30 as a mom and doing a craft-based ethnic art form. I mean, that was a hurdle, but I had certain rules. I love making jewelry and wearables. That's where this comes from, is from wearable, usable, functional things. Native art is about decorating your life, not putting, corralling it and putting it on the wall in a box. But I refused to sell things under $400 when I was getting started because I felt that would undermine my standing. And so I felt like I had to get away from the gender stereotype of a Native woman who makes small objects for sale and isn't an artist, but is a craftsperson and an easily exploited craftsperson. But yeah, so there's gender and there's ethnicity and there's age, and there were all those factors. And so now my youngest is a junior in college, and COVID was supposed to be my empty nest time. So unfortunately that backfired a little bit. It was not as empty nest as I anticipated, but we're getting there. And yeah, so it is interesting to see other women my age also coming into their own as they have more time, and as they also have more time to kind of figure themselves out and get rid of those, some of those insecurities that are there when you're in your 20s and you're figuring so much stuff out. And you can just get to a point where none of it matters as much. You're a lot freer to do what you want to do. Yeah. That was a lot. I saw gender and I was like, I'm going to do a little word vomit here, but it's.
It was a great answer. Thank you. And that segues into another question. I'm going a little out of order here, but do traditional beadwork artists, people who do beading in more traditional work, such as clothing, have opinions of the use of ancient techniques being incorporated into modern technology and ideas?
Yeah. So one of the things I didn't explain here is that I didn't learn beadwork in order to become, a capital A exhibiting artist. I learned beadwork as somebody who did make traditional clothing and regalia for powwows and moccasins and those types of objects for my community. And I still very much do that, both for myself and for community members. It's a different approach, and it's different rules, and I have different techniques and materials that I use. But for the most part, I'm not going to say that there's no pushback from more traditional people or parts of our communities, but for the most part, there's a lot of excitement about taking those clothing and those things that we wear in more private areas and pushing past the barrier and wearing them all the time now in some manner or another, whether it's jewelry or gifts that we give or pairing them with contemporary clothing. That's been a really exciting breakout, I think, in the last 5 years that has really been happening. And it's really exciting to see that we're not siloing off different parts of our worlds anymore, and that but we're not stopping to wearing the beadwork. We're actually bringing it in and wearing them all the time. Beadwork is now, jewelry for all the time. And next week is Rock Your Mocks. And so that is a day of wearing your moccasins in public as a way of both, helping the public understand that Indigenous people are still very much here, but also to there's to wear your moccasins to show people that you're there, but also to wear them to show yourself that you're here, and to normalize that kind of Indigenous clothing, that it's normal anytime an Indigenous person wants to wear it. So on Monday, I will be wearing my moccasins to my class on Monday at OSU and wearing them for my seminar, and I'll be presenting on my paper and I'll be wearing them then. And so that's, there's and beadwork itself is innovative. Glass beads are not a pre-contact, that's a post-contact product that we're using. And so when Indigenous women use those, we're being innovative. They were being innovative then, and we're being innovative now. So it's, for me, it's, might sound contradictory, but it's a continuity of innovation, and to keep adapting those supplies and applying them in new ways. And it's also part of my personal motto of just covering everything with beads. And slowly I will just cover it all with beads if it holds still long enough.
Sounds good. Okay, let's see. I love that you pair the design motifs with the landscapes to which they refer. Are there other motifs you didn't get to yet that you will work with in the same treatment?
Yes, and I'm also reaching out to some, I would like to work with drone photographs in the future as well, but I'm also hoping to pair up with, specifically to pair up with some other photographers, and to have it be a real, unfortunately, Leroy and I didn't get to do some of the trips we had planned, where we would go out into landscapes together and make some decisions. And that was kind of a pipe dream we had that we didn't get to realize. And so my goal is to work collaboratively with some photographers, and hopefully with some Indigenous photographers, to truly collaborate on some landscape views, and to do some very site-specific pairings of a very specific site with a very specific design. And to do that, some of these have had to be more general. And so I'm hoping to do some collaborative, really specific works that might be about specific individuals, events, or very specific geographic places. But some of that, we'll see when we're all traveling and out and about again. But yes.
Okay, well, that kind of leads into the next question. What's next for you in your art? And does anyone else's art now excite you?
Yes, and so what's next? Right now, I'm, as Susan said, right now I've gone back to grad school, so I'm sort of only thinking about 2 days ahead at this point. So what I'm doing right now in grad school is studying art history, and it's all beadwork all the time. So that's what I'm hoping to do research about and to write about, with the goal of trying to bridge everything I've learned about beadwork all along the way in the history, and to bridge that with what I know as an exhibiting artist, and then to connect that with original research that I want to do and to write. So I want to be able to circle all that up together, and to be able to really to share what I'm enthusiastic about beadwork and about Native art with everybody. So I don't have any, and with COVID, there's not a lot of shows I have on the list, right? I've been holding off. But I have more works planned in this color theme back here with this piece behind me, where I'm doing some, again, large scale installation components on canvases. And so rather than landscape, these are color fade paintings that I'm working with. And I'm going to go big, and I'm going to do 12 by 36 inches and have 4 or 5 of them installed in a large grid with beadwork on them. So I'm looking at some large scale installations to get really big, and to use pre-made canvases and painting as a way of taking my idea and making it physically large, so we can get some of that physicality and some of the beautiful, bright, bold color that I think is a part of the experience of dancing at powwows. That as you dance here and you're there, that explosion of color. So the landscapes are beautiful in their own way, but I want to play with in the same way those color grids were small and really fun and playful, I want to kind of take some of those ideas and do them really big. And we'll just see how big of a canvas. Photography is limited to the size I can print it and actually safely work on it, but canvases are big and sturdy and strong, and I can abuse them a little bit. And so I'm thinking that that's a way to get scale up and to sort of work larger. And who excites me in work right now? God, I have a lot that I'm excited, but I'm going to have to beg forgiveness on the brain fog because I've been reading nothing but theoretical articles for a while. I'm really interested in, I'm kind of becoming more interested in installation art. I mean, I'm always excited about Marie Watt, and Joe Feddersen is a personal hero for me, and which is probably, if you know Joe Feddersen's work, all my component stuff makes sense and patterns, and I love Marie Watt's textiles, and if it wasn't obvious from all my component stuff as well, I love Donald Judd, not personally, but I love his work, and I love boxes and forms, and especially installing these big canvases on the wall and letting shadows, cast and play, and in grids, and lots of grids of cubes. I think Donald Judd loved beadwork. I don't know. We don't have proof of that, but I'm going to say he probably did, or would have at least.
At least if he'd seen yours,
he would have been like, we can do something together.
Excellent. Well, Molly, thank you so much for sharing your artistic practice with us tonight. It's been a delight. I wish this could have all been happening here in the gallery, but here we are.
We roll with it.
We've done the best we can to kind of do things safely, and really appreciate your patience. And I know this exhibition has taken a long time to happen, but yay,
it's here. And it's a lovely catalog, which I hope everyone will go get some.
Yes, and again, the catalog is here.
And it's gold.
By Jessica Harjo, with wonderful essays by Heather Ottone and Alicia Harris. So thank you to both of them for sharing their words with us. And I really encourage everyone to come and see the exhibition before it closes on November 21st. Seeing Molly's work in person is so imperative, because yes, the beadwork does not, photos don't do the beadwork justice. It's just really hard to capture, and seeing it in person is just amazing. And then as the light changes through the windows, and it really is something you need to experience in person. So please come to the gallery. It's open Wednesdays through Sundays from 12 to 5 p.m. Admission is always free. And we hope to see you at 108. And thanks again for tuning in tonight. And thank you again to Molly Murphy Adams for sharing her work and her thoughts with us tonight. So everybody have a good rest of your evening, and be safe out there. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.